I'm very pleased to be joined by Ariel Beery, who is the author of a new book with a very intriguing, at least intriguing to me, title, Being Israeli After the Destruction of Gaza. Ariel, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
So before we talk about the book, maybe you could just tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am uh, father of three living in Zichron Yaakov, which is a community established in 1882, little between Tel Aviv and Haifa on the coast of the Mediterranean in Israel. I've spent the past 20 some odd years building social businesses that focus on solving challenges facing communities around Israel and the world. I launched in 2005 an organization called Present Tense that built accelerators for social entrepreneurs in Israel, the United States, and Eastern Europe, help launch over 1,000 organizations, half for profit, half non, that address challenges communities faced. We started the first Haredi Women's Accelerator, the first Bedouin Women's Accelerator, the first Arab Life Sciences Accelerator in the history of our region, as far as I know. And then in 2012, I invested in and joined as CEO of a med tech company in women's health, focused on cervical cancer, working in emerging markets. And we worked primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, focusing on addressing the challenge that kills more women than every other disease but one, and for no reason, because it's the easiest to treat. And it's become, thank God, the standard of care now in most of the global South. And when that was acquired, I went on to help governments in emerging markets do R&D for addressing the COVID, because the global North was taking all the diagnostics and therapeutics, but people were dying in India and in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, and so I worked with them to help spin up those industrial plants, and that gave me the time to kind of think and reflect. And when January 4th, 2023 hit here in Israel, which was when the current government's Minister of Justice declared that they were going to take over basically the government fully, that is, take over all branches of government and in many ways turn Israel into an autocracy. I, together with many other people, devoted full time to fighting for liberal democracy in Israel. That continued after October 7th, of course, and when the war on October 7th, after October 7th, um, crossed the line, as far as I was concerned, and many other people were concerned, I found myself very troubled by what this government was doing. We continued protesting every week, as we have for almost 4 years now, and doing other things in addition to the weekly protests, of course. And that's when I came across your book and others that challenged me and troubled me, and I felt that that those the voices of the people who now are a majority of Israeli society, I mean, close to 70% of Israeli society, fighting for liberal democracy at this stage against this government, were being flattened. And so that's why I decided to write a book, inspired by yours and by others, of course, to reflect this movement that I think is the best hope for Israel and for the region.
Um, So yes, I do appreciate the title as I guess a kind of I guess a response, a critique of of the title of my book, and I'm curious about how you decided to structure the book. It's a book in which it's composed of interviews with different Israelis, and tell me about how you decided on who to interview and what you found as you interviewed these folks who you feel are kind of in the liberal democratic camp in Israel.
Sure. Well, I started from my sense that the kind of the public discourse, the conversation about what's happening in Israel, has generally ignored the voices of this liberal democratic opposition. And what I did not want to do is just tell my story, because my story is just one. And so what I sought was to find a range of different backgrounds and identities that are able to express their experience of Israel in their own words. And so I look for people from the right, from the left, people who are religious, people who are secular, and spoke with them. I mean, it was a lot of it was for me to be able to find the words to express what Israelis are thinking right now. Because again, I have my own words, but they're affected by my background and my identity, and I wanted to know what others were. I did decide to look for people who were what I called insider outsiders. That is, people who could see things from multiple different angles. I think it's one of the incredible things about people who are somewhat alien to the society in which they live, that they're able to look at it more objectively, or at least objectively. And I just really wanted to talk about that movement that's not getting enough attention through their stories. And so that's how I picked the people. I start the book with a woman who is deeply religious and has been building Meredith Michigan, who has been building people-to-people activities and peace-building activities now for decades. She runs the co-CEO of Amal Tikva. And I end the book with Aliza Enbal, who has been working in international development, but previously she was very involved in the Oslo process, and now she's very involved in protective presence, and she's not secular, but she's definitely not on the same level of religious faith as Meredith. So it goes between left and right within that framework of people who believe in and are willing to fight for regularly, continuously liberal democracy in our country.
So I guess one of the things that I found surprising in the book and that you address in the introduction is your decision to not interview Palestinians, either Palestinian citizens of Israel or Palestinians who live under Israeli control beyond the 1967 lines. Because you said just now that you wanted to talk to people who are somewhat alien to the society they're in. And I would think that Palestinians who live in a Jewish state actually would be perhaps the most alien in some sense. And you acknowledge this, and I want to quote what you say in the introduction. You say, "It is important for me to explain why I decided not to include voices of non-Jewish Israelis, despite their growing centrality in Israeli society. I did so because I did not believe I could at this time accurately and faithfully communicate their experiences since October 7th or their evolving relationship with the state and the Zionist movement. I am aware that this exclusion has a cost and that the Jewish nature of the state matters deeply to its non-Jewish citizens. This book's silence on their experience is a limitation. I hope others will take up the cause." I think the first thing that really struck me about that statement was this reference to Palestinians in particular as non-Jewish, but not as naming them as Palestinian. And I found that a little bit of a curious linguistic decision. I'm just wondering if you thought about it as such.
Well, of course. Well, so Peter, as you well know, there are quite a few segments of Israeli society
Mhm,
that are not Palestinian.
mhm,
The Druze would not call themselves Palestinian. Bedouins do not oftentimes call themselves Palestinian. The Kirkeshim oftentimes don't call themselves Palestinian. So there, and onwards and onwards, meaning, so what I wanted to do is to acknowledge the diversity of the non-Jewish population of Israel.
mhm,
That includes within it people who would call themselves Palestinians and those that wouldn't. There's
mhm,
quite a large percentage, a growing percentage of people, and if you look at opinion polls within the Arab population of Israel, I'm using that term specifically, the Arab population of Israel, that put their Arab identity first, their Israeli identity second, their Muslim or Christian identity third, and their Palestinian identity fourth. And because of that, it's really important to have that diversity and to understand how people wrestle with their different identities. Now, with that said, I am and have been trying to have a book like that written by someone in, I've been trying to help people to write that book. I mean, to give them the methods that I used and explain why it was that I made my choices, because I had a few conversations. I run workshops with organizations that organize both shared society work as well as work within Arab communities, specifically on futurism, meaning thinking through the future that we want and then finding ways to get there. They've been fascinating. They've been wonderful. I have been inspired every time. And what I learned from those workshops in conversations with the various different identities that some might, flatten, but I prefer to keep open, is that I don't have the language to be able to express what they're really thinking. And I think that you saw in the book that every one of the conversations that I had, in the end, I had to acknowledge my subjective understanding of that conversation. I reflected it through my own subjective experience. And I felt that if I did that for a voice that I have very little shared experience with, I would do it an injustice. So I would love, 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 love to work with individuals to help them express what their society is going through right now. And I'm trying to do that actively.
I guess, and I wish you luck in that effort. I mean, I guess to me, you do acknowledge there's a cost. And to me, the reason that the way I thought about it seemed to me the cost in the book is that you're making an assertion that it's possible to, as I understand it, to have a Jewish state that's also a liberal democracy. It seems to me that the more one includes Palestinian voices, and if one wants to call them Druze voices or Bedouin voices, again, these are many people have multiple identities, including Jewish Israelis who have multiple identities. That it's those people who are most likely to offer the strongest kind of critique of the position that you hold, and yet you don't include their voices in the book, which seems to me in some ways not to be subjecting your own position to the strongest critique.
I hear you, but that wasn't the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book was to express what the liberal democratic camp in Israel, the one that's been protesting on a weekly basis and fighting for a better government and a better Israel, think. And I can't be comprehensive. But what I can do at the very least is to be honest about where I'm coming from, because I think that those people are our best hope. They
Mhm,
make up the majority of Israeli society. They have been activated in a way that they haven't been activated before, and they're missing. They're missing
mhm,
from your narrative. They're missing
mhm,
from many of the narratives on the pages of the New York Times or the
mhm,
Washington Post or other publications. And I think that that's a shame because I think that especially today, when you in America are dealing with similar issues of fighting against a government that is seeking to consolidate power and
mhm,
to break down the institutions of liberal democracy,
mhm,
we need to learn from one another. And by
mhm,
the way, I learned that from working with and learning from individuals who fought for liberal democracy in Poland and Hungary and other countries in Europe that are fighting against this populist wave, this democratic backsliding. And I think that if we don't give ourselves a moment to recognize what we can talk about
mhm.
as individuals, listen to one another and learn from one another, I think that it's just a shame.
So you said that you said, I think if you're correctly, that 70% of Israelis are fighting for liberal democracy. I'm just curious how you came to that number and why you think 70% of Israelis are fighting for liberal democracy
If I'm
or
not
support liberal
mistaken,
democracy.
if I'm not mistaken, the number from the polls is 68%, but I rounded
Mhm,
it up to 70. We have consistent polls in Israel over the course of the past 4 years now, almost,
mhm,
by Accord, which is a polling center in Hebrew University,
mhm,
that have shown consistently that Israelis are opposed to what this government has been doing in order to take more and more of their rights to themselves. And that,
mhm,
that to us is very concerning. So
mhm.
for us, at the very least, it's really, really critical that that we tell the world what we're fighting for and for the world to understand why it's so important to support what it is that we're doing.
Right. So by supporting liberal democracy, you mean opposing the judicial overhaul that Netanyahu and his allies have been
Well,
pushing.
all of the above,
Mhm,
all of the above. I think that the mistake that many people have made
mhm,
over the course of the past few years is
mhm,
that um, they've kind of um, limited what the movement has been fighting for, which is
mhm.
why interviewing people that have been in the streets and have been working towards liberal democracy is so important. And that's what I try to reflect in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one question I'd like to push you on a little bit is you say in the book, our fight, you're talking about the people who are opposing Netanyahu's efforts and his allies' efforts. Our fight was to ensure Israel remains a liberal democracy. I guess when I look at Israel, and again, I look at it as an outsider, not as an insider, as you do. So I have a particular vantage point, which is necessarily limited. Israel looks to me like a pretty robust liberal democracy for Jews, although I could understand that there's fears of backsliding. But it doesn't look to me like a liberal democracy for Palestinians. Most Palestinians under Israeli control don't have citizenship, the right to vote for the government that has control over their lives. And even the minority of Palestinians who do have citizenship have a second-class form of citizenship. So that doesn't look to me, it looks like a liberal democracy for one ethno-religious group, one, and not for another.
I understand why you might say that, and I think that the occupation, the military occupation is of the West Bank is something that has to be ended. And I think that many for as long as I've been alive, from my days in the youth movement of Hashomer Hatzair, which is a socialist Zionist youth movement, till the present day, I've protested and fought to end the occupation. And there have been times where we thought we were succeeding, and then there are times where we unfortunately failed. But I do think that, racism exists in every country. I don't need to tell you about the racism in the United States and
Sure.
the way that democracy has been curtailed across the American South and other areas of the United States where the government has used its policies to be able to reduce the ability of people to access voting, let alone, policing rates and incarceration rates and so on. So I think that there's a difference here between the ideal and the real. And while I am very respectful of those people who would say that we need to continually strive towards the ideal, is what I believe in. I do think that we need to acknowledge that in Israel, those citizens of Israel across all backgrounds, even those Bedouins who live in unrecognized towns, which I personally think is a travesty that are continually unrecognized, that need to be acknowledged, that need to be brought in more fully into Israeli society. Every one of them has access to universal health care. Every single one of them has access to Israel's social welfare network. Every one of them has the ability and the right to vote, and they do vote. And when they vote, they have representatives in the Knesset. So I think that it's much more complex issue. But again, I'm happy. I think on our own time we can have these conversations. I have my own politics, but that's not my role here. My role here is to provide a little bit of a introduction to that community in Israel that I believe is our best hope for building a better Israel, for building the opportunity for a Palestinian state to live in peace beside us. And I think that it's important for your audience to get to know this community and to see what we can learn from it and how we can dialogue with it. And I think that building that begins on recognition and understanding of the narratives that they experience.
Yes, and I believe the narrative is important. I mean, the conversation is important, which is why I wanted to do this. But I feel part of the conversation is pushing a little back a little bit against some of the assumptions that don't are not entirely convincing to me. So, to me, there is, it seems to me, a contradiction between the idea of liberal democracy, which for me is, as is its root, the idea of equality under the law, a state that treats people equally, irrespective of their race, religion, ethnicity, and the idea of a state that has a special obligation to members of one ethnic, racial, or religious group. If someone in the United States said, Donald Trump said tomorrow, we're going to make America a Christian and democratic state, I think me and most Jews and many Muslims and others would say, we see a contradiction there. To me, I do see a contradiction between the idea of liberal democracy and the idea of a state that has a special obligation to Jews when again, roughly half the people under Israeli control are not Jews, and even 20% of Israel's citizens are not Jews.
I understand that. Do you believe the same thing for Greece, which has a national religion as well as a national church, or England, in which the head of state is also the head of the church? Or, I mean, my point is to say that,
Yeah,
or the United States, which is clearly a Christian country, a country in which, in order for people to be able to participate in it, they have to abide by the Christian rhythms of life. I grew up
yeah,
in New York City. I grew up, in Lower Manhattan under the poverty line, Israeli artist parents who came and benefited from rent control. And I did not for one second believe that I lived in a non-Christian country. And so I hear you, but I think
yeah.
that again, it's the difference between the ideal and the real. Would I love for Israel to be to be more egalitarian in
Mhm.
every way, that every person between the river and the sea has equal rights, each within their own political
Mhm.
polity. Absolutely, no question.
Mhm.
But and I think that most of the people in my book would say the same thing. I think all of them actually would say the same thing. And I think that the question for us, for you, for me, for the people that are listening or reading is how do we improve the world that we're in? How do we work with allies who understand the importance of liberal democracy, who come from a place where we understand that the real is only the beginning and the future is something that we build together? And how do we build those alliances in order to push that forward? And I think that the mistake that happens when those voices are flattened, when
Mhm.
Israel is seen as something that is outside of the pale of liberal democracy, as opposed to imperfect like every other place, is
Mhm.
that we all lose from the ability to work together in order to improve the world we live in.
Right. But I think Israel is outside the pale of liberal democracy, which is why Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, the UN have all called it an apartheid state because it is a state in which there is everywhere between the river and the sea, although manifesting in different ways, a clear legal hierarchies between Jews and Palestinians. In the most extreme form in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, where most Palestinians don't even have citizenship, right?
Well, wait, I need to stop you there, Peter, because you know very well that in East Jerusalem they can become citizens and
No,
they choose not to.
that's not
Yes,
true.
they can.
Palestinians can
Well,
apply. No, no. Palestinians can apply to become
Peter,
citizens. Let
Peter,
Palestinians can, and
I,
most, and oh, go ahead.
Peter,
Go ahead.
no, I hear you. I hear you. I really don't think that it's something for us to litigate right now. Neither you nor I are going to get to a place where we agree. And I think that that's not the point of this book. My book isn't a polemic. It's not making an argument.
But
What
it
it's
is making
doing
an
is,
argument.
what
It
it's doing
starts
is
with the argument that Israel is a liberal democracy and that we should support those who are fighting to preserve it as a liberal democracy. I'm questioning the premise.
Mhm, I understand.
And you're right. It is a small question about whether Palestinians who apply for citizenship in East Jerusalem mostly get it. My understanding is they mostly don't get it. But the point I would make is that if the reason that I think Israel has been classified as an apartheid state is this clear legal supremacy of one group over another, which in there's a difference between having a Christian society as we have in the United States, because the vast majority of people are Christian, and an explicitly Christian state which has laws which privilege Christians over non-Christians. In the UK, you could say that the Anglican Church and its role in the head of state has an element of that, but it's much, much, much less extreme. It's than what you have in Israel, right? Where you have, again, most Palestinians don't even have citizenship in the state in which they live.
Well,
And
I think that
yes,
I think that again, we're getting into a territory that every state has its own complexities.
sure.
Racism and the primacy of one group over another exists everywhere. The United States of America is a white Christian nation, and people have been saying that and fighting against that for quite some time. But that's what it is, and
What
that's
do you
why
mean by,
and that
go ahead.
it's a
Sorry,
white,
go
it's the
ahead.
United States, it's a white Christian nation. You have a minister of war now, the secretary of war now that has it tattooed onto his skin. I mean, we can talk about extremism in every country.
Mhm.
Greece is a wonderful example of that.
Mhm.
Spain, which is not allowing the Catalans to have their autonomy, moving immigrants into Catalan to ensure that they don't get autonomy. The Basques. I mean, we can go place to place.
Well, let's
Let
do that.
alone
Let's talk
countries.
about those places and compare them to Israel.
Well, the point that I'm making is that those conversations are conversations that should be had. That's not the conversation that I think that you and I should be having, just because I think that your readers and your listeners care deeply about liberal democracy, both in the United States and in Israel.
Yeah.
They care deeply to ensure that Palestinians between the river and the sea have equal rights. They care that their lives have dignity. It's what I care about too. But I think that what your readers have unfortunately not had access to is to understand who those people are. What is it that drives them? What do they care about? What are they fighting for? And I think that while the black and whiteness of the current moment, where people polarize to the edges and either you agree with me or you disagree with me, is very appealing, that's not what I'm trying to do here. And I don't think that it's worth spending our conversation on relitigating things that are constantly, yelled about in the press.
I certainly don't want to be yelling, but I do think there is an assumption at the core of your book, as I understand it, tell me if I'm wrong, right? That Israel is a liberal democracy, and you want to center the voices of people who are fighting to preserve Israel as a liberal democratic Jewish state. And the question I'm asking is this possible, or is there a contradiction there? It seems to me that Israel is in a very different situation than Spain. Catalans and Basques have Spanish citizenship, right? Spain does not have an equivalent of the Israel Land Authority, where the vast majority of land is controlled by a parastate institution that gives almost half its seats to the Jewish National Fund, right? So that the vast majority of the land is allocated by an institution, in part by an institution, specifically for the purposes of one ethno-religious group. I do think that's very different than what you see in Spain, or what you do or the fact that Pete Hegseth, who I loathe, has a Christian tattoo, right? Hegseth and Trump may be wanting to move America towards being a Christian state, and we're fighting them with everything we have because we don't want America to be a Christian state, because we don't believe that states that give supremacy to one ethnic religious group is compatible with the principle of liberal democracy, and you seem to think they are.
I hear you. And so the 13 million Native Americans who live under occupation in your land on reservations, and the Puerto Ricans who do not have the same right of representation, and the Hawaiians whose kingdom was taken from them and continues to be occupied, and Papua New Guinea. I mean, Peter, we can go at this all day. I mean,
I'm happy to talk about
America
those. Let's talk about those
but
cases.
my point is that that's not the point, because I believe, and this is I think where we perhaps we differ, but I think it's really important to emphasize it. I believe that the world is imperfect. It's broken. It's
I
broken
agree.
everywhere we look.
Yes.
Racism and power politics are problematic anywhere you look. The best we can do is to strengthen those who are fighting for the good and fighting to create the world that we want. And we have a very limited time on this world. We have the ability to spend our time focusing on fixing or on tearing down. And in my particular case, and the people in the book, all of which are involved and invested in fixing, it's to try to make it better, not to return to what Israel was before January 4th, 2023, to recognize that the policies that the Netanyahu regime has held over us over the past 17 years has made life worse, to try to return to a path that Rabin, before he was assassinated, was working towards. But for us to be able to get there, there's a lot of work for us to do. And I think that one of the mistakes that I keep on seeing from very well-meaning people who
Mhm.
care deeply about the soul of the Jewish people is that they don't recognize what they're doing in many ways by silencing and flattening the narratives of those people who are seeking to do that work, who are our best hope, is
Mhm.
that they're actually making it harder for them to do that work. And so the question is, how can we, because we're people who care about the soul of the Jewish people and about what the Jewish people does, how can we support the important work that needs to happen?
So you talked about fixing, and you talked about a vision. Tell me more about what is your ultimate vision? Because when I agree, the world is always going to be imperfect. It's always broken, right? And we're always trying to improve it in some direction, right? Towards some ideal that we have, even though that ideal will never be realized. So when it comes to Israel and Palestine, what is that for you?
Well, I will tell you about what it is for me, but I'm more interested in what the people in my book said, the people I interviewed for the book.
Okay, if you want to answer for
So,
them too, that's fine.
well, I won't for them, but
Okay.
I would love for people to know what they said to me, right? So there were those who were interested in creating a confederacy, just
Hmm.
like Canada, where you
Hmm.
have a dominant Anglo set of provinces as well as a French province, but they're all under one political rule. That was Elise Ball's perspective. There were those who
Is
fought
this
for.
within the Green Line or from the between the Jordan and the Mediterranean in total?
So I think that that's something that's open and questionable. How about I do the opposite? I'll start from what I think, and then we'll go
Okay.
forward. I think the difference between I think it's something that's important perhaps for me to say, and perhaps the difference between me and you is that I don't believe in European nationalism. That is, European nationalism, the Hobbesian or Lockean concept is that there are these geographical boundaries and they
Hmm.
represent states.
Hmm.
And states within those states have political power. And
Hmm.
people need to find either a social contract or give up their rights in order to be able to be within that political framework.
Hmm.
I come from the school of Buber, which
Hmm.
I believe is the school, Martin Buber, which is the school of Jewish thought, which
Hmm.
is that, and frankly, of the left, which
Mhm.
is that people should have voluntary human beings all are
Mhm.
equal in the name in the eyes of the creator, and they should have the right of voluntary association. And those human beings should be able to create communities that represent their values and cultures and live in peace with other communities of people who feel differently than them. And so for me, the current boundaries and current borders of the state of Israel that were created because of war and ceasefire lines and whatnot, they're irrelevant. What's relevant for me is which political communities want to live together, whether
Mhm.
it's a 12-state solution, whether it's a two-state solution, a three-state solution, a six-state solution, doesn't matter. What matters to me is that different political communities can feel that they're expressing themselves. By the way, I include within that the idea that and I find it fascinating that so many people are willing to fight to maintain the borders of Lebanon or
Mhm.
Syria when they're what the Frenchmen drew on a map, as opposed to what the people within it actually want. And
Mhm.
so for me, same as Israel, same as Lebanon, same as Syria, across the region, what political communities, what cultural communities, what communities want to represent them, I think is important. Now, in my book, you have different people look at it differently. Some
Mhm.
will say we need a two-state solution. Some will say, well, we have to recognize that that at best there's going to be a three-state solution because it's clear that the government of Gaza is not going to fall under the government of the West Bank, of the Palestinian Authority. There are others who say, well, we need a confederacy. There are others who say that we need to think about a binational state, such as Canada. And what was so important for me to show in the stories and narratives and the words of those people I interviewed for the book is that the liberal Democratic camp is actively engaging in that conversation. And that unless we open that conversation to people such as your readers who care deeply about the soul of the Jewish people,
Mhm.
but might not know that that conversation is occurring, then what we're not going to have is the ability to have a fruitful and constructive process to understand how we advance, at the very least, some progress towards a better reality for the peoples of the region.
So, in terms of understanding what your particular vision is, I understand that, if I understand correctly, the number of states isn't so important, right? So, what are the principles that you would want to govern however many states there were in Israel Palestine?
Again, that's not what I write about in the book, because what I
Mhm.
write out in the book is I reflect the opinions of Israelis on the spectrum within the liberal democratic camp. And I highly
Mhm.
encourage, if you want, we can speak about those. Me personally, the principles are anarcho-syndicalist principles. That is the principles of Hashomer Hatzair of the kibbutz movement, which is
Mhm.
that communities should be able to be self-governing. And
Mhm.
what that when they work together across community boundaries and they create these larger collectives out of the recognition that we can be stronger together. But I think that in the end is what self-determination is all about. Self-determination cannot exist while you are determining for other people's what their lives will look like. And that's why the military occupation, in my opinion, is such a travesty. I should point out, and I think it's really important objectively to say this, um, the military occupation is terrible. At the same time, the rights afforded to Palestinians living under military occupation have increased over time, and the amount of hospitals and access to social welfare systems are far greater than many other countries in the region. That's not in any way whatsoever to justify the military occupation. What it is to say is that there was a process of ongoing and strengthening of the Palestinian Authority and its ability to be able to do the work that it needs to do in order to represent the fundamental needs of the Palestinian people that are citizens of the Palestinian Authority. And that work has been curtailed by this current government and by Netanyahu in general. And I think that if we have a chance for peace in our region, it's to strengthen Palestinian leadership. It's to strengthen their local and community leaders, especially who are the next generation who have been rising under the autocracy of the Palestinian Authority, and to ensure that they can find the dignity that they deserve as human beings in self-determining their destiny.
Do you think that Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem should vote for their leaders?
I absolutely do.
So
I
you
think
would,
that
go ahead.
I think that that we just saw elections for the municipal level that were
Mhm.
incredibly fruitful.
Mhm. And so would you put restrictions on which parties could run in those elections in
That's
Palestinian?
not on me. They should determine their own destiny.
Right. So if Hamas wants to run in those elections and Hamas wins those elections, you would respect the results of those elections.
Yes, and if war needs to occur because of what Hamas would do, then war would occur.
Mhm. Right. I mean, no, I agree with you. I agree that I believe Palestinians should be allowed to choose their own leaders, regardless of what choices they make. Um, I wanted you mentioned the term, one of the terms you used in the introduction to talk about the people that you are interviewing, and I think yourself, tell me wrong, is this term which is, endlessly discussed here in the United States, which is the term Zionist. And I just wanted to ask, what does the term mean to you?
So I've struggled with the term quite a bit
Hmm.
because I come from a school of thought that believes that Judaism is the value system that guides the Jewish people at that moment in history.
Hmm.
And I believe that Judaism has become Zionist. Just like Rabbinic Judaism is now Judaism, people don't say Rabbinic Judaism anymore because the Karaites are no longer, they're the other. And I think that right now, anti-Zionist Jews are just like the Karaites. They are a splinter of where the majority of the Jewish people are believe that the Jewish people should have a home that they can determine their destiny in. So, well, the term itself, I don't necessarily think means anything anymore because
Hmm.
it's just integrated into what the majority of the Jewish people believe are the ideas and requirements and obligations of what it means to be a Jew. But where I come from, if you're talking about Zionist philosophy, just like you would talk about Rabbinic Judaism, is I come from the school of Ahad Ha'am, of Baruch Nelson, of those individuals who believe that Zionism is the movement to liberate the Jewish people from living under the power of those who would determine for us how we live. It's the ability for us to imbue our values and our hopes in the mechanism of a state. Again, the state not being in the European variety of necessarily bound to a particular territory captured through military aggression, but rather defined by the people who come together in voluntary association to want to support one another in living the lives that they want to live. And that tradition is very rich in Israel. It's a tradition that founded this state, frankly. And it's a tradition that I believe is an important one and would be with a different name, of course, but I believe is the right of every people to define their destiny and their and the set of values and politics that they want to live by.
So are you saying that to be a Zionist means one supports a Jewish state?
I think again, I don't think that the term is necessarily important anymore.
Hmm.
I think that right now that Judaism right now recognizing the existence of the state of Israel and its importance in Jewish life.
You mentioned the idea of Jews, I think the words you used were having a home and being able to determine their destiny. Why couldn't Jews see Israel, Palestine as their home and determine their destiny there in a state that treated them equally alongside Palestinians and was not a Jewish state, but was a state that didn't privilege any group, any ethnic, religious, racial group over another?
Well, I think again, there's a difference here between the ideal and the real,
Hmm.
but also because I think that any state that has geographic boundaries determining what that state will be is
Hmm.
destined for civil war. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. Because I think that in the end, people want to work with other people they trust. And the process of forcing people within a particular territorial boundary to
Hmm.
work together just because they're between a river and a sea causes violence. And unfortunately, we've seen it. And you can see it across the world. There's a reason why Yugoslavia is no longer Yugoslavia. There's a reason why we call the term balkanization, because people have they have particular values that they want to live, that they want to see expressed. And moreover, and I think that this is something that's really important for me to emphasize here. That's equal for all human beings, as far as I'm concerned. Human beings are equal, not only in the eyes of God, I'm a believing person, but I believe just objectively, we deserve equality. That equality should also allow us to determine our destiny. And I think, by the way, Peter, that if you believe that it's important for Palestinians and Israelis or Jews and the multiple identities of non-Jews that are between the river and the sea, that they should live within one political territory that's determined by geographical phenomena, and that would be better for them, then making the case to those Jews in a way that makes their stories feel heard would be very helpful. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that those Jews do not feel heard
Mhm.
and their desires aren't being taken into account.
So, if I understand you correctly, you believe that Israeli Jews should have the right to determine their destiny and Palestinians should as well.
Again, I think that there's that yes, so long as those so for example, I'll
Mhm.
say it again, just again. Um, I know quite a few Arab Israelis
Mhm.
that do not consider themselves Palestinian. You know,
Mhm.
the best example for this is when Avigdor Lieberman, who's a very right-wing figure who
Mhm.
I have no political love for whatsoever,
Mhm.
came up with the idea of his plan for transfer. And when he said transfer, he didn't mean transfer populations.
Mhm.
What he said specifically is we were going to draw a line between Jewish communities and Arab communities. And those Arab communities are going to go into the Palestinian state, and
Mhm.
those Jewish communities were going to be in the Jewish state.
Mhm.
And an immense protest broke
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
where Palestinian, well, that's what we thought at the time, but now more and more people are talking about themselves. Well, they did. It doesn't matter. The point is that those individuals that would have been part of a Palestinian state said, we do not want to be part of a Palestinian state. We want to be Israeli and continue to be Israeli citizens.
Mhm.
Now, take that as you will, but we do need to recognize there was a complexity within that society that I can't speak to because I'm not part of it. I don't speak the language. I'm not part of the culture. I can't tell
Right.
their stories. I don't understand the insinuations. And so it's
Right.
really important for them to be able to tell their story and not for me or for you, I think, to speak in their name.
No, I agree with that. And I think, I think all societies are complex and have internal divisions. I guess the reason I was asked about the question of determine their destiny is it seems to me that I think most Palestinians historically and still today believe that for them, part of determining their destiny is having the right to return to the places that they or their families were expelled from or fled in fear from in 1948 or, later in 1967. And I'm curious how you think about that.
It's a real tragedy. War is terrible. War is absolutely terrible. And I think that that people should be able to return to a state that represents them.
Hmm.
And I think that we need to recognize that there were Jews that lived in Gush Etzion, for
Hmm.
example, that is, in what now would be considered the West Bank. There were Jews that were in Jerusalem that were kicked out of Jerusalem under Jordanian occupation. I think that there are terrible things that happen, and obviously Israel's not the only place that happened. I mean, you know as well as I do that around the world there are millions upon millions of people leave their homes, are expelled from their homes, are pushed out in threat of violence, are chased out, but they don't return, and that's a tragic aspect of just human life. And so I think that the best we can do right now to ensure the peaceful existence between our peoples is for Palestinians to have the right to return to their state when we create it.
You are certainly right that many people in practice don't return, but the question is, should we support their right to return? And I do find it has struck me as ironic that we Jews who manifested this right of return after 2,000 years are saying to Palestinians who after 75 years should not be able to exercise that right. Palestinians whose families come from Safed or Haifa or Jaffa or Ramla who don't come from the West Bank, who come from a particular place that they have a very, very profound attachment to. Why should we of all people have the right to tell them that they don't have the right to return to those places?
I hear you, and the pain is real. I feel that pain. You know, my grandma was raised in Marrakesh
Hmm.
in Morocco. Um, 1,000 years of community destroyed.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, my friends, my best friends, the one who I started Mobile ODT, my women's
Hmm.
health company,
Hmm.
his family's from Basra in Iraq.
Hmm.
3,000 years of community
Hmm.
destroyed. House is gone.
Hmm.
My neighbor here, whose
Hmm.
family is from Egypt,
Hmm.
um, wiped out, taken away.
Hmm.
It's terrible. History is terrible. Life is not fair.
Hmm.
It's not fair.
Hmm.
And I think that the best that we can do is to build for a better future.
Hmm.
And I think that the practical reality of the world that we live in is that just like the racist and imperialist policies of gentrification that have transformed where you live in
Mhm,
Manhattan
mhm, mhm,
or other places across the
mhm,
United States
mhm,
that not only priced out but also intimidated Black Americans and
mhm,
Hispanic
mhm,
Americans from their homes,
mhm,
they won't return.
mhm,
And in this case, the same thing. More violence for sure. The
mhm,
Civil War was terrible,
mhm.
terrible. But the fact is that we need to be able to build a future for those Palestinians. I can't build it for them. I can only do my part, which is to end the military occupation, as well as those people that I feature in the book. And that those are the voices that I think that people need to hear because I think again they're the best hope we have for building a better future here from an Israeli perspective.
I mean, you mentioned your mother's family being from Morocco. You know, my maternal grandmother's family is also from Egypt. But I think that if you want to go live in Morocco, you should absolutely have the right. And my understanding is actually that you do. You could apply for citizenship in Morocco. I think Morocco is actually quite welcoming, not only of tourism, but of actually of Jews living there. So why should we not support the right of Jews whose families come from Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, wherever, to return? There are many Jews who have gone back to now live in Germany, who live in Poland, who live in France. Why should we not support that principle for Jews and for Palestinians?
Well, for it's not a question of supporting again, and this is the difference between the ideal and the real. I
Mhm,
understand where you're coming from, and I honor it. I think the pain is real. It's
mhm,
a real pain.
mhm,
I also think that there is a question of how we build political communities of voluntary association where people can work together in solidarity to build a better future. And I think that there it's just what the world works as. And yes, if that's something that you want to fight for, I understand. I understand it. I understand the pain there that you're trying to solve. I also think, however, that I personally believe that it's important to fight for the larger aspect of self-determination for all peoples in our region. And I think that there's quite a lot of people that are suffering right now, suffering tremendously, suffering because of the imperialist policies of the global north. And in each one of those cases, I think that we can spend only a certain amount of hours a day. And I think that if we want to get to a sustainable peace, which I think is the most important thing, one in which both peoples can express themselves and become the best of who they can be, I think we need a Palestinian right of return to Palestine.
There was a line in the introduction that struck me. You were talking about how the people you interviewed refused to respond to Israel's challenges, quote, by giving up sovereignty to return to a state of powerlessness. And it's a kind of formulation that I feel like I've heard in other places. And I wanted to ask you about it because it doesn't seem to me that giving up on the idea of a sovereign state that gives Jews legal supremacy over Palestinians equals powerlessness. Equality to me is not powerlessness. And I don't think that white South Africans, when they gave up on when a system of white supremacy ended, became powerless. I don't think Jews are powerless in the United States, even though we're a small minority in a state in which we have no legal privilege over others. So I wanted to ask you what you meant by saying the choices were either Jewish sovereignty or powerlessness.
Well, I think that there are a few different things. First, just to because I know that you have a personal experience in
Hmm.
the crimes that happened in
Hmm.
South Africa. I'm
Hmm.
assuming your family were there during the apartheid years, and I
Yes.
don't know if you grew up, with black servants in your
Hmm.
home and
Hmm.
being. I
Hmm.
don't know what your personal experience was, but I have friends that grew up in South Africa who, you know, that was just the reality that they lived in, where they had, indentured servants or however you want to call them, because they weren't exactly slaves, serving them throughout their childhood, and recognize how much guilt they have towards that. And I want to honor that and say that I'm very happy that that situation is no longer the case. I think that there's a very different question here in Israel. I think that the majority of Israelis were not born in the global north. Their roots are not in the global north. They're
Hmm.
from Muslim lands.
Hmm.
And I think that one of the narratives that most Israelis recognize is inherent to their own experience is that of second-class citizenship or dhimmitud under Muslim law. And
Hmm.
because even the Constitution of Palestine that was just published a few months ago, that with French help, declares Palestine to be a Muslim state and to have
Hmm.
special rights and privileges for Christians and so on. I think that there is a well-concerned fear that they don't want to go back to being a dhimmi. And
Hmm.
so I believe that it's important for us to acknowledge that and to honor it and to recognize that sovereignty in their case means working with other people that share their cultures and traditions and to self-determine within a framework that respects the equal rights and value of every human being within it. And because of that, I think that the feeling is that moving the direction that you've advocated for
Hmm. Hmm.
is very triggering to them and to their personal stories. And so, because I believe the liberal democratic camp is the best hope
Hmm.
for the Israeli side of solving the
Hmm.
conflict, because obviously we need also people from the Palestinian and general Arab and Muslim world to join in as equal partners in this work. I wanted to tell those narratives to your community and to mine.
And so your view is that a state that was based on the principle of equality under the law, whether it was one unified state or two states that were both based on those principles, those would not be states in which Jews could live equally and safely.
Well, Peter, I think it's really important here because maybe we're missing something.
Hmm.
Um, this state is not Jewish on a blood level. As you know, there are Jews here that are from India, from Ethiopia, from the Persian Empire, from Eastern Europe.
Hmm.
It's Hebrew in its basis. It's Hebrew in its language. It's Hebrew in its culture. It's Hebrew in its holidays. It's Hebrew in its traditions. It maintains the Ottoman practice of millets. That is, every community has its own religious kind of overseer, so to speak, which is
Hmm.
something that I personally disagree with completely. You have a chief rabbinate. You have a chief for the Muslims. You have a chief for the Christians. And that's an Ottoman policy that we continue, which I think is silly. Um, but in that regards, it's just as Jewish as Spain is Spanish and France is French and so on and so forth. That is, again, we can go back to, the let's take Greece as an example, just because it's an easy one. But if you want, I'll take any other European country or African country or what have you. Although the African countries are primarily post-colonial, geographically determined uh, autocracies, which I know I've worked with quite a few Africans across Sub-Saharan Africa that will I can speak to their stories a little bit, although they'll do more justice than I. But the fact is that Israel to maintain its culture, this beautiful thing that is for the first time in quite some time has existed in this world where the Hebrews can be Hebrews without needing to assimilate or fit into another sovereign culture above them. Um, we need to have that place of our own. And I think that's fine. I think it's fine for us to be able to say we believe in the future where we determine who we are without needing to assimilate into another culture.
You said that, if I understand correctly, that Hebrew is the basis. But when you on in when Israel determines whether someone can return and get citizenship, right? It doesn't ask whether they are a Hebrew speaker. A Palestinian who was a fluent Hebrew speaker, right, would not be allowed to come and get citizenship, whereas a Jew who had no Hebrew would be allowed to come and get citizenship, right? So explain to me a little bit more how you believe that Hebrew is the basis. It seems to me the basis is whether you were defined as a Jew or not.
Hebrew culture, first of all, which includes quite a range in terms of who is Jewish and who is not Jewish and what that means, and that's an issue in great contention here in Israel, which is
Mhm.
something that the liberal democratic camp has been fighting for and
Mhm.
fighting on and discussing quite a lot.
Mhm.
But again, just like I believe that every political community should be able to determine who's in it. I mean, voluntary association is voluntary. Either you believe in voluntary association or you believe in coercive
But
association.
voluntary association for who?
Exactly. And that's
Right?
why
Because
the
when you
independent
deny a
review.
Palestinian the right to return to the place they were born, you are denying their desire to voluntarily associate by going back to the place where they were born.
No, I think that I find it interesting, Peter, because I find that that what you keep coming back to in this discourse is this idea of geographical boundaries as somehow, this inalienable right. That's not where I'm coming from at all. I
Hmm.
believe, yes, this is the land of our ancestors. I mean, you open it, for thousands of years, thousands of different cultures have thought the same thing, but that's irrelevant. I think the relevant thing is that there's a this a polity here. There is a community of communities, which is contentious and it's complex and it has a lot of challenges within it and it is imperfect and it has racism and it has sexism and it has misogyny and it has all the things that I think are quite troubling. And yet, it's something that I think is precious. It's something that can be improved and worked forward. And I think the same thing when it comes to what the Palestinians should build. I think that what they are building, actually, frankly, what the Palestinian Authority has been doing over the past 30 some odd years is building an identity of a state, mechanisms of a state that I believe Palestinians should have great pride in. And I think that now the next generation of Palestinian leaders, political leaders that are pushing for more representation and democracy and governance should be lauded and supported. Same thing with liberal Democrats in Israel. And so I think that we need to go back to this question of which rock is whose and where for eternity. I think is silly. I mean, take for an example. I mean, I don't want to go into particular examples. If you want to, we can. But I really think that the point and why I'm here is to say that there is a group that deserves the attention that I think it deserves. Meaning it deserves to be heard, which are these activists that have been on the streets Saturday night after Saturday night, working to oppose this current government, working for a better vision of Israel, one that abides by the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, which has equal rights for all, regardless of creed or nationality or religion, a group that believes that Israel can be what it was founded for. And I think that your audience should recognize them, should be in conversation with them, and should find solidarity in what you're doing in America as Americans.
Right. I think we've gone just about an hour, which is about the amount of time we said we would talk. Ariel, I wanted to thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
And the name of the book again is Being Israeli After the Destruction of Gaza, and there's a picture of it right there.
That's right. Yeah.
Ariel, thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care. Bye bye.